Are you connecting all the dots on the journey to your inner wisdom? Are you looking for a fresh perspective on the messages you've been asking for?
So who doesn't want to be happier, healthier, wealthier, and wiser, and be able to make life's choices with confidence because they finally see the signs? We know you do.
I'm Angela Coulter.
And I'm Sarah Sieg Avignoni.
We're two conscious journeyers dedicated to turning over those rocks and helping you on your personal intuitive sleuthing mission of evolution in our multi-dimensional hologram.
And that includes Earth too.
Yes, it does. Welcome to Solving Me, our conscious puzzle-solving podcast, where we look at the natural relation between your life experiences and their meaning in the bigger picture, from the most mundane to the most overwhelming.
So what do we mean by all this? Well, have you ever thought that getting a flat tire and twisting your ankle could be related? And maybe a message about what's preventing you from getting that awesome, high-paying job you would love. Believe it or not, it's all connected.
Want to know more? Come on and let's get sleuthing. See what comes up in this episode, because it might just be about you. Welcome to episode 27. Today we're talking about anger. Like we've talked about fear, so now we're jumping into anger, which is related. And many don't even see anger as a message in any way.
Right. It's such a fiery topic.
Exactly. So what happens with anger, and the reason it needs to sort of be pulled out on its own, is that many times we get angry and it truly is a trigger. Now, we did do a whole episode on triggers you can go back to.
Yes, we did.
But anger is typically a result of a trigger. And then we want to spend all of our energy projecting that anger onto something outside of us.
Finding the scapegoat, essentially,
Mm-hmm.
And especially if it's another person, it's like, you made me angry.
Yes.
That's the complete abdication of responsibility and being that 100% you have more power than I do, and I'm just the victim.
Yes.
Wow.
And so that stops everything dead, because I can't tell you how many conversations I've had over the years where I've had clients and people I know who are just like, yeah, but they did me.
Right.
I've had people stop talking to me literally because I've turned it around and been like, so what is that triggering? What is that anger about within yourself? And they get
what's here for you?
Right. And they get so angry at me that they stop talking to me. I had somebody reach out to me who is a peer and does the same kind of work. This was years ago. I told you about this. And she was connected to another person that we had known, who they had done some courses together, and the other person went off and then totally like cut themselves off from everybody else and created her own thing. But then she apparently had taken some of the content without permission and incorporated it into her new stuff. And so this other person she was very angry, and she was very slighted. And so she wanted to do some session work with me, and we were having some discussion, and all she could do was talk about the other person, what a terrible person that she is, and how hypocritical she is to do that and like claim to be so conscious and all that kind of stuff. And all I came back with was, okay, I understand you're angry, but what's really important is to look at why you would create that situation for yourself.
Exactly. Yes, that's getting to that place of setting the anger aside for just that split second to say, okay, let me get my head back around who I am and look at it from a different perspective. And I think that's where, I know from my perspective, that was the hardest part for me because mine was, I was afraid of people's anger, which meant that I was afraid of my anger. Mm-hmm. And for me to be able to set that fear aside and then pick that apart. But when somebody would be angry, that I would go to that place of fear. And then it was, I just have to stop their anger so I feel better.
Mm-hmm.
So that's power in the whole different dynamic, but
Yeah.
it's still the giving your power away.
Yes. Yes. And often what happens is because the ego gets so in this situation where you're angry, the ego gets so built up and so enraged that it doesn't want to see what's in the mirror. And the last thing it wants, so when you turn the mirror on itself, sometimes it actually inflames the anger even more, but usually it's because the person who is angry at somebody else, when you turn around and say, so what is this? What is this? Why did you create this situation? Because there's such a deep judgment of themselves.
Yes. Or of
That
the
they don't
anger,
look at it.
period.
Of the anger, right? Because we judge anger as bad, quote unquote.
Bad. Right. Absolutely.
And
And that was the case with me.
yes,
Is I had judged anger as destructive and something to be feared.
mm-hmm.
And I I right offhand, I couldn't come up with what made me create that. What happened that gave me that lesson to hold that judgment. But just coming to that place of understanding that I felt that it was a destructive energy. Oh, well, let me see if I can change that. Let me see where that leads me. And that gave me a whole different relationship with anger. And it put me in such a different dynamic with relationships that I had because I didn't feel disempowered by someone else's anger because that was about them.
Yes. Yes. And that's the thing to remember is somebody's anger, yours or somebody else's, has nothing to do with the other person in the party. It's all about them. And we do that all the time, especially when we are openly sensitive, right? So we allow ourselves to feel what's around us. Like people call it that being empathic or whatever. We're all empathic to different degrees. But, when I was a child, I hated people being angry around me because I felt like it was an overwhelming energy. And that goes into the perception of it being bad and feeling like I'm going to die in this energy, or I'm going to be in danger, or I'm going to hurt somebody if I allow myself that from me.
Yes. Yes. And I think children they're in such situations of they automatically feel so disempowered, size wise, intellect wise, emotionally, so many different ways. And then to have an adult or a group of adults express anger, whether it's directed at them or not, it's just like a sponge. They just absorb and react from their perspective. And that's the thing that gets pulled forward and changes to where it's not necessarily what it originated as and can be so detrimental to their goals in their life. Absolutely. Which, brings us back to the whole beginning of this is, when you're not in congruent living in alignment with what you say your goals are.
And then we deny ourselves, we lie to ourselves, we fool ourselves. And I'm not saying this with any judgment. This is all because we have been taught to. No, you're supposed to be this to be a good person. You're supposed to believe this to be a good person, or to fit in, or to be valued, or to be loved. And then we believe that. And then even if it's incongruent or not in alignment energetically with who we are, we then will put all this energy to trying to align with that. And it's not truly who we authentically are. And that causes friction and frustration and eventually anger.
Yes. And when we, like, for instance, in my circumstances, I was always trying to appease others' anger, which then prevented them from moving on in their journey because that anger was theirs and I was managing it or trying to manage it, which is an illusion in itself.
Yes.
But it did create delays for them. So I finally brought myself to a place of I'm going to let you have your anger in respect for your journey.
Mm-hmm.
And that was such a big thing for me.
Yes. The other part for me too was coming to this place. It's funny how it's come to this place around in consciousness of when anger comes up, I allow it to be what it is without projecting it onto anybody. So if I have anger come up, it's being present with the anger. And we talk about the exercise of like inviting fear in, like we talked about that in the fear one. But there's another exercise where you can just invite anger in and be like, okay, so what are you here to show me? Because this is obviously important enough to raise a huge red flag that's created by that anger.
Yes.
So
what do you have to say to me?
mm-hmm.
Why have I created you? You obviously have some value here for me.
And
On
a lot
some
of
level,
times,
I've created you because you hold value. So let me get that value.
And a lot of times it's because we judge ourselves so harshly for something. That's what we want to project onto somebody else.
Yes.
We feel like we wasted our time, did something wrong, that we were dumb for doing something or not doing something. Like it's all judgment. Anger comes from judgment of something being bad or wrong or unaligned, or I can't, or, that frustration of I can't get to this and getting really angry. So I have found that since I've allowed myself to get angry when the anger comes up, and I just simply will retreat to allow my own anger be itself without projecting it onto anything around me, it is fast. Like I'll say, okay, I'll give you a container. Like I'll give you 24 hours. I'll let the ego have your temper tantrum. Do it.
Right.
And
I'll give you the microphone. Say
exactly
what you have to say.
Exactly. And it'll go on in my consciousness, and I'll hear the screaming and and I'll journal about it, and blah 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 blah, all this stuff wants to come up. And then when that's burned out, it's like a child having a temper tantrum. Eventually the temper tantrum, when you let it just burn, will just burn itself out, and then you see the message sitting right there behind it.
And you usually go, that's it.
Exactly. Wow, that was a whole lot of energy for this little thing that we could have just looked at. But we do that. And that's the key for us talking about these kind of emotions and energies as messages, is because we put so much energy into masking the true message often that we lose it in managing the anger.
Yes, absolutely.
Managing the fear, like we did in the other episode.
Right. Yeah. It ends up managing us.
Mm-hmm. And becoming such a huge distraction of like how to manage that, how to look at anger management. I think about anger management class
right?
a different way altogether.
Absolutely. Right.
But I've had people say to me, I can't imagine you angry. And I'm like, oh, I get angry. Absolutely. But I also don't hold on to it. I let myself I do my best to not project it. And I do my best to stay completely observant of it when I let it come through. And I give it a container of a deadline. That's what you're allowed. And then it's time for us to look at it and move on. Kind of thing.
Right. It's the guest that's allowed to visit and not overstay their welcome.
Yes. 1 cup of tea. That's all you're allowed.
Absolutely.
And only till it gets cold. So you can't like extend it. So when you have a lot of anger, there's always I have found there's always other energies and emotions underneath it. So it's usually multi-layered, right? The anger comes from frustration. It comes from sadness. It comes from beliefs around being abandoned, deprived, regret's a big one.
Self-loathing.
Mm-hmm. And self-loathing. Self-loathing is what we project on others all the time.
Absolutely. I know that I get frustrated at times, which then ramps up into the anger when someone shows me something about myself that I haven't dealt with.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like the anger is, I know, but it's that little temper tantrum and but I haven't had time, or but I'm too afraid, or but I really like it even though I say I don't.
But theirs is worse.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a tender thing. And anger is really sometimes, so some people will argue that sometimes anger is productive, and sometimes it is, because sometimes it will be the fuel that helps to project us, or, into what we
Right.
need to
Yes.
step into.
Yes. I worked with someone one time who said that they used their anger as a tool because they got stuff done. They made things happen. And that is, what's the book? Power versus Force. The difference between forcing something versus, allowing the power to flow. And I do think that it's, even though they believe it's a constructive use of anger, I think that there are consequences.
Well, because eventually what happens when you do that and you are consciously aware of that, it's really sort of a bargaining of the ego saying, oh, well, we're using this to our advantage, so we might as well have it. Right. And if you have the threat, if the ego has the threat, quote unquote, of releasing that anger that you have identified with for so long, it doesn't want to let it go.
Oh, absolutely. You feel you're disempowering yourself.
Mm-hmm. Well, look at how productive it's been for me.
Absolutely.
I've been doing this this is how it propels me. So like, what would I do if I didn't have it? So that's a danger, something to be aware of in terms of saying, so yes, can it be productive? Absolutely. But not for a regular basis dependency. It can be a tool, but not a crutch.
Right. It's not a basis of action.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the key is for us to learn to have action without that need for that propulsion. And then when we take away that, because often we do believe that. I have spoken to many people, and honestly, I've had the situations happen where I've been propelled by anger too over my life. I mean, I think we all have.
Absolutely.
But I have recognized anger for what it is and the message that it brings me. And I have gratitude for it when it comes up, because usually if I get to that place of anger, it's a deep one in the crevice, right? A cracker crevice that I've uncovered. And it's like, no, way too raw, which means way too deep, which means, yes, I need to look at it now.
I need to give you that cup of tea. Yeah. We need to have that conversation.
Yeah. Let's have a chat, as uncomfortable as it might be. And that's for me, that's the purpose of letting that temper tantrum, like, sort of have a container, ebb itself out. Mm-hmm. Right. And then have it say, let it have it. Yeah. Give it the floor, and then not get emotional. It's being observant to it and not lost in it. That's what I tell people all the time, is it's okay to have anger. The key is to not get lost in the anger and to see what purpose it is to show. It's there to show you.
Yeah. What's the message?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So,
and it's, as we say with everything, it's very personal. Mm-hmm. And having someone else tell you what your anger is about is a very slippery slope. Mm-hmm. Because they can't fully understand what your anger has to say, because they are not you.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes the ego will say, oh, that sounds good. Right. I'll have you in that, so we don't have to really look at this thing. Okay, cool. I'll go with yours.
Exactly. Because that's easy.
That's easier. I can do that. Yeah. So that's your first step here. That's the purpose of us talking about this in this episode, is look at the anger you have. And one of the most challenging steps is getting to observe anger without getting lost in it.
Right. Yeah.
And I know, because there have been times where I've hit that all-consuming anger, and I just want to get, like the ego goes, no, this feels good to get lost in it. And then it's like, no, I'm going to watch. You do it. Here's the floor. Like you said, here's the mic, take it. And I'll just sit back and be in the seat and pay attention. So I get the message.
Right. Yeah, it's like the Frasier, I'm listening.
Yes. So listen to your anger. Invite it in for tea. Look at it in a different way. And instead of being afraid of it, number one, give anger back to others around you, right? Give their anger back to them and don't take it on as yours. And B, only use your anger for yourself and don't inflict it on yourself, but use it for the helpful tool and the message that it can be.
Right. Let it be the voice that it's reaching out to be.
Yes. Thanks for listening to us on Solving Me. If you found this podcast helpful, make sure to subscribe so you get notice every time we post a new episode.
And for a short time, we have a special bonus for you. Go to solvingme.net to download your free ebook, which outlines the next level of conscious solutions for your inner investigation.
Be sure to help us spread the word. Share us with others you know who want to solve the puzzles of their everyday life through the filter of expanded consciousness and have fun doing it.
One more thing. Do you have some puzzling life circumstances where you feel blocked and you'd like our take on what's going on? Send us your conscious puzzle at connect@solvingme.net and maybe you'll be the topic of a future episode.
Until next time, happy sleuthing.